Hi everyone. This is a slightly rejigged version of lecture that I've given for the last couple of years on YouTube and social television. Ignore the week number there because I forgot to change it for the presentation. And this has become a more important lecture given the emergence of TikTok. And I haven't talked about TikTok specifically in the title because I wanted to focus still on some of the key aspects of what YouTube means as a company in the social space first. But there is certainly the third part of this lecture focuses very strongly on TikTok as a new and nascent form of social media and how we might theorize our engagement with TikTok is covered a great deal of that. But that theorization of how we engage with TikTok actually applies to most social networking sites, including YouTube too. So I'm trying to cover many bases basically. So what do I cover here? Why does YouTube matter? How do we experience social television? What is social about television? And based on YouTube and the rise of social television, how are video sharing platforms changing today's screen industries? What is streaming culture? And how can TikTok and YouTube be conceptualized? So why does this matter? Well, just some stats for you, as I usually do. YouTube has 1 billion monthly active users. If YouTube was a country, it'd be the third most populated in the world. 80% of YouTube's views are outside the US, so it is a global phenomenon. On average, user spends 40 minutes on YouTube on their mobile device per day. That's a lot, considering the average. As an average, and I think about my own use and 10 minutes maybe on YouTube, maybe 20. So somebody's clocking in a lot of minutes to get the average up for people like me. There are 4 million videos viewed every day and 6 billion hours of videos watched on YouTube every month. 300 hours of video uploaded every minute, and YouTube reaches more 18 to 49-year-olds than any cable network in the US. And I think that is the clincher. As a form of media, YouTube reaches the parts that old media just do not reach. People consume YouTube in vast amounts compared to what television and traditional media is consumed. And videos are shared 2 times more than Facebook text or image-based content. So in terms of importance of YouTube is a platform for the sharing of user-generated content, which is at the core the content of social media. So we're again talking about these discussions of sharing the self and self-presentation and Irving Goffman's work from lecture 3. A platform that creates content to be shared across other social networks. Also, YouTube content can be taken and put on Facebook, on Twitter. It can be used on Instagram. If you dice and slice it, it can be used on TikTok, for example. So the content on YouTube can be used elsewhere. It's a platform that is used by major corporations in the sharing of content also. So it is not just user-generated content. This is also a platform where most, if not all, major media companies have a presence and use the platform in order to push out their products. And it is, of course, a platform owned by Google also. So it is Google's major intervention in the social media space. In terms of what that means for Google, Google's model of operation can be argued to be constant real-time biopolitical exploitation. These are things that I went over to a great extent in the Facebook lecture, but the words biopolitical exploitation are new, and I'll take some time to explain what these are now. For Hart and Negri in 2000, they argued that the contemporary capitalism, which Google is a foundational part, is based on a form of what's called Foucauldian biopower, and therefore derives from the work of the French sociologist Michel Foucault. Google's vision is one where the world is made completely knowable, controllable, and predictable, and this is what is known as biopower, the ability to exert power over other entities in the most efficient manner. So Google's vision is one where the world is made completely knowable through its systems, and therefore if you know everything, you can control it and make it predictable. Google are therefore proponents of an ideology that Evgeny Morozov called technological solutionism. You can solve everything as long as you have enough technology and data. No, there isn't a problem out there that can't be solved by tech. So, solutionism is a recasting of all complex social solutions, either as neatly defined problems with definite computable solutions or as transparent and self-evident processes that can be easily optimized if only the right algorithms are in place. And this kind of solutionism is rife not just in social media but in all digital media companies. The idea that everything can be solved if we just throw enough of what we do at it. So Morozov argues that solutionism is a typical ideology of Silicon Valley entrepreneurs and intellectuals who glorify digital media as being the solution to society's problems. Technological solutionism reimagines the individual and the social as part of the algorithms of social media and digital media in general, and therefore any problems arising at the individual or social level can be solved by media. Google can be seen as a control machine that aims at controlling people's perception of reality and transforming all our perceptions into profit. And YouTube is critical to that vision. And this is dark, right? Technological solutionism is the idea that the human is no longer important in the solving of human affairs. In fact, all that is important is having enough technology to solve those things. Now, what does that mean for us in terms of social TV? Well, in social TV, we are in the prosumer position. We are the consumer and the producer of TV, and we are doing this on these platforms. And our comments mediate and alter the meaning of social TV text. If you want to know more about that sort of process, then John Fisk's comments on audiencing are important. I won't go too much into that now, but what I will say is that the prosumer position advocates that we are always remaking the meaning of things, and we do this through our interjections via comments and likes and so on that can alter the meaning of social TV text. We are therefore a part of this process. Although, as I've just said, that process is largely controlled by gigantic corporations who are looking to make our consumption as efficient as possible in order to solve some kind of defined social problem that we are inefficient television watchers, for example. So again, this is really, really problematic. Now, Stuart Hall's ideas on the active audience and decoding can tell us much about the nature of watching social TV. As an audience, we are challenged to select and understand YouTube content in very particular ways. And I think Hall's notions of active audience can be useful here. Previously, prior to Hall, with a linear model of communication, you might remember me talking about theories of audience last year in MS100, where I said most old theories of audience are absolutely terrible, and the reason being for it, they're based on a linear model of communication where you have sender, medium, receiver. That is really, really problematic. Stuart Hall's encoding decoding model rejects those endpoints and says we have encoding and decoding and lots of different factors shaping the ends of the communication process. At the encoding end, we have ideologies and the way intentionalities of producers, for example, and at decoding we have the knowledge of the audience and what we bring to each text and what meanings we're looking for and what meanings we can infer from things. And so there is much more going on at the endpoints than those simple models of going back to the 1920s through to the 1960s. In Hall's encoding decoding model of transmission, we have a number of processes at both ends, and that results in three potential ways that we can interpret texts. The preferred reading, which affirms the hegemonic order, the oppositional reading, which challenges the hegemonic order, and the negotiated reading, which is a mix of the other two. And what is interesting about YouTube and social TV in general is there is an idea out there that they sit outside of the hegemonic order, right? That these are sites of production where people can make content which would never be shown in mainstream media, which would never be a part of the mainstream media. And therefore, YouTube and TikTok, for example, and I suppose Instagram as well, have a role in digital culture, which is to allow people to express themselves in different ways and allow people to create content and create, express ideas and express visions of the world which would be outside the normal order of things when doing them on mainstream media. Mainstream media wouldn't touch these things. Now, for Gramsci, hegemony is the exercise of cultural and social leadership by a dominant group via persuasion and appeal to common sense rather than by force. And the question we need to ask ourselves is, does YouTube challenge or reinforce hegemony? There is the idea that YouTube is a repository for all this user-generated content, which in itself could be, in the operative word, be a challenge to the hegemonic order, and therefore can provide a welcome difference to the world, difference to what we might see in the world. This perhaps is more problematic than it seems. YouTube largely, and most of the content that is most consumed on YouTube is not made by amateurs, it is made by professionals, and therefore it seems to me that that wouldn't be challenging the hegemonic order. And even when there is content out there which is perhaps opposite, if we think of the COVID-19 situation, right, and the pandemic and what's happened, a huge amount of content on YouTube expressing views outside of the views expressed in the mainstream media and indeed by scientists and governments about vaccines, for example, or about the efficacy of mask wearing, or about the the virus itself. In the view that YouTube challenges the hegemonic order, that material might be seen as being positive, whereas in fact it's been highly damaging and problematic. So this notion of what does YouTube challenge or reinforce hegemony is actually really, really important. My suggestion would be to think that YouTube and the content that is on YouTube, and the most accessed content on YouTube, it does reinforce hegemony. It reinforces the sort of cultural leadership by dominant groups in society, because YouTube as a company, which is an arm of Google, reinforces particular messages over and over again and pushes content to us which does this. Part 2 coming up shortly.